Good morning, good afternoon, and good evening to everybody logged in today. My name is Mary Owen, and I want to thank you so much for attending today's presentation on virtual system recovery. Stacy Budd, who's one of our principal consultants, will be your host today, and you can send him questions throughout the presentation. Just use the question section of your interface, and we'll get to those at the end. Later this afternoon, I'll send everybody a recording of this webcast so you can watch it if you missed part of it, or you can share it. And with that out of the way, take it away, Stacy.
All right, thank you, Mary, and hello, everybody. And I do want to say that we're going to have a short presentation and a little bit of hands-on to show you the product as well. So before we get started, let's kind of talk a little bit about Arcserve and who is Arcserve. From being on the inside, right, we assume everybody knows about us, of course. Why wouldn't they? Arcserve's been around for 25 plus years in the industry, and you kind of just assume. But reality is that people have more important things to do than worry about who Arcserve is. So just to touch base, since a year and a half ago when we split off and became an independent company, we've seen a lot of change, not within just the product but within the company. The exciting thing is that really all that change has been positive, right? So we've had over 5 updates to the product, a new release to the product. We've had appliance lines come out. We've had an abundant amount of change and newness to what we offer. So from being on the inside, I can say that that's really exciting for me. Some of the other things, that we're proud of is kind of how the industry's taken notice of us as well. I had the pleasure of being at VMworld last year in San Francisco. At VMworld, we actually won Best of Breed kind of award for virtualization backup, which was exciting, but it didn't stop there, right? We also won similar awards, in Europe with VMworlds that were going on over there. We've been recognized across numerous, different publications and different things like that as well. So as far as the industry goes, they've definitely taken notice of us. So that's a good thing. We're not a little company, right? We have a worldwide presence, with offices in over 20 countries, lots of customers, lots of partners that we distribute through as far as that goes, right? So I'm not going to read the numbers to you. They're on the screen, but definitely a lot of change within the company, recognition as far as within the industry, and a good presence worldwide as far as that goes as well. When we look at virtualization, right, so I'm like kind of, we all think, yeah, I know all about virtualization, but if we look at kind of the roadmap for virtualization, right, it's definitely been one of the most significant changes in the last 5 years, maybe even a little bit longer than that. It's changed almost every aspect of how architecture is designed. So networks, storage, server themselves, right? It's touched everything, if you will. I can remember a day when, SANs were just for really being able to move your backup traffic. Now when I talk to most customers about, storage area networks, they're talking about from a virtualization perspective, and that's where their virtual servers are. And it's less about, the backup traffic and more about the virtualization and all of that as well. By now, I'd say that most of the organizations that we deal with, right, have implemented some type of virtualization with maybe up to 90% virtualization rate. I do get the occasional customer that is still running, a physical environment. I do get a good majority of my customers that are running a mixed environment as well. But it's usually the rate, the physical to virtual, the majority is going to be virtual nowadays as far as that goes. And we do that why? Because better resource utilization, those kind of things, from memory, from storage, all of those kind of things. Traditional architectures, not really the greatest, and sometimes are insufficient to meet some of these challenges as far as using resources, and all of that. So that's where virtualization really comes into play. Virtualization really changed things, right? Resources are now shared across multiple virtual machines, right? So your memory, your storage, all of that is kind of shared within that, your processing power, right? So when we look at backup processes, they really have to be able to adjust to this new reality as far as shared resources and all of that as well from the single server kind of implementation. When we look at single server, or if you look at like agent-based implementations, right, it could cause a server to crash or something like that. How's that affected the hypervisor? Because now you have all this. So when we look at sharing those resources with the backup product, right, it's much better, much more efficient. If it uses the if you will, the hypervisor as opposed to individual resources within those machines. When we look at virtualization backup, right? Virtual machine backup. In the early days, is limited in a number of ways, in which backup software could interface, right, with the hypervisor, performing tasks. As a rule, when the hypervisors were altered or upgraded, compatibility issues kind of would rear their ugly heads, right? So those are some things that you had to worry about, early on. And while this is clearly an acceptable kind of risk for small kind of deployments, smaller backup vendors, large enterprise, software vendors were a lot more conservative in the way that they rolled out their VM-specific backup capabilities. Now, we see today that, the hypervisors themselves have integrated APIs, right, to work with backup software to make this perform a lot better, right? So now you see a lot of vendors that were kind of a little bit slower to get into the market. Now they're getting into the market a lot more aggressively, and then that's the case with us as well, right? So it's not gonna impact the client servers as much, right? We're going to leverage what's built into the hypervisors. They're going to provide us out snapshots. Going to be much cleaner. And what's kind of the benefit of that is really, you have, vendors that, clearly have much broader depth than somebody that's just focused on virtualization, right? So that's kind of the story with how it's evolved, and now, from the perspective of Arcserve, right? So now how it's evolved, and now we've embraced it. Not that we didn't before, but it was a lot different. Now that we're leveraging those storage APIs from them, it's a much cleaner solution, and we're still be able to focus in on those other environments, physical, application-specific kind of things like that as well. When you look at key features, right, for virtualization, the first one, basically host-based agentless backup for virtual systems, right? So being able to back up virtual machines without having to rely on installing agents and having those additional processes and IOs that run inside those machines, right? And then thanks to features like change block tracking, and cloud-based, recovery and in-place recovery, the design of disk-based devices is evolving quickly as well. Virtualization migration going from physical to virtual, virtual to virtual, and in even some cases virtual back to physical. I've seen that go come into play as well, where customers have rolled out and maybe virtualized an application that they see, I like the way it performed a little bit better physical on a physical machine. So I've seen customers actually in some cases move away from virtualization, and you can use your backup product definitely to kind of help with those things as well. When we look at agent versus agent-free backup, right? An agent is software that's installed on the VM, right? So as where an agentless backup uses the hypervisor's API for backup. In effect, they're running, the hypervisor software as opposed to impacting the systems themselves. Even though the above-mentioned APIs allow for off-host backups, some vendors still rely on agents installed within the VMs, right? So the agents may be used to help with, application awareness, for granular backup and recovery, for databases, email servers, things like that, and in some cases may accelerate a raw backup performance, right? So you still see some that will still, even though they do an agent list backup, they'll still install an agent for some features as well. Agent-free backup offerings don't install code into the virtual machine, right? So granular recovery of application data is still available. However, the backed up VM image may have to be mounted as a separate VM and have that data copied out of it. That's really where the agent-free kind of backup perspective comes into play. And again, some agent-free backup products kind of have developed helper applications, if you will, that will allow for scanning, searching, extracting granular data components from, well-known data types such as, Microsoft Exchange, SQL, Oracle, things like that as well, without having to mount the VM image. So a couple of different offerings there within the industry to think of. When you look at change block tracking, right, hypervisors APIs have increasingly added capabilities such as VMware's change block tracking, or CBT, right? That's what we kind of hear it referred to more often as CBT. Allows the backup software to understand which parts of virtual machines' backup images have changed since the last backup, right? So we're not addressing, even with an incremental, right? It's even a little bit better than that. So it's a key feature, right? Needless to say, it allows, backups to occur more frequently. When we look at backing up, virtual environments within this, now I can, instead of backing up daily, I can back up, multiple times a day, maybe hourly, maybe even more granularly than that. So that's definitely things to look at as far as that goes. Now, change block tracking, right, initially backs up an entire machine with a snapshot. That's the way that it works. And after that first backup, technology locates only the blocks, of the VM that have changed since the last backup. These change blocks are backed up, but none of the unchanged information is copied over to the backup. Other vendors offer similar technology that are called incremental backups or backup delta block, those kind of things. Change block tracking allows the backup tool to restore only virtual machine data that is different between the current state of the VM and the backup image, right? It basically is going to speed up the restore time. That's kind of where that comes into play. Now, when we look at other types of backups and other types of things to look at, features, right? Synthetic fulls. I get synthetic fulls come up quite a bit with customers that say, well, yeah, our vendor does synthetic full backups, right? So that's similar in this case. And synthetic fulls are a little bit different, right? They do start with a full backup, right? They're useful in a handful of cases, right, with virtual server backups. Near continuous backup around the clock operations, be able to create synthetic full for point-in-time recovery or compliance is definitely a nice-to-have kind of thing as far as that goes. The main thing about the synthetic full is at some point they'll tend to be a true-up where you will have to do a new full. Right, so that's kind of the thing you have to keep in mind with the synthetic full is typically there will be at some point a point where they do a new full backup. It may be weeks out, it may be 12 weeks, something like that, but there still tends to be that new full backup that's done on occasion. Array integration, when we look at that, some backup software leverages features of specific arrays, right, allowing them to take the snapshots. And in some cases, of course, that's going to, maybe give one vendor an edge over another vendor. It kind of depends on what you have in place or whether or not you're looking at buying hardware. Maybe that's important to you as well. Multiple hypervisor support, right? That's something to look at as well. So if you have more than one hypervisor deployed, making sure that the features spread across the hypervisors, right? So if you have both VMware and Hyper-V, right, it's probably the two most common that I run into. There's definitely other vendors out there, but those are the two most common. So are the same features going to be available in the two different products? And if not, how's that going to change based on that? Backup verification. This is, I have a saying, it's never trust a backup. It's not because the backup software, you can't trust it. It's not because it's not because the hardware, that you could possibly have some type of a failure, whether it's tape, disk, whatever, corruption. And it's not even because of human error. It's because of all three of those things, right? You always want to make sure that you do definitely test as a best practice, verify your backups and do test restores, those kind of things as well. When we look at backup consistency, what happens if a virtual machine fails or is migrated during the backup operation, right? Will that product ensure data isn't lost, given all the scenarios introduced by VM movement and those kind of things? And then platform support, obviously, right? So the product's got to support your infrastructure, whether it's virtual, physical, what the OS versions of the hypervisor, the OS versions of the clients, your firmwares and your driver versions, definitely these can be the bane of IT organizations, right? So you have to make sure that that's supported as well. When you look at, virtual system backups, right, in summary, right, things that we definitely want to take into account, right? Enhanced restores have definitely been improved significantly in virtual environments, right? First, instead of having to restore an entire VM image, right? Now you can take and restore, individual, files or folders within that. So, and that's generally going to be what's going to be required for most people out there, is the option to do an entire image or an entire system, but then also give you the ability to restore granularly as well. And of course, some vendors are going to leverage CBT, for restores as well. Large databases corrupted, you only want to recover, the blocks that were corrupted, and be able to speed up that restore process as well, right? And restores can be further enhanced in products that allow for execution of VM directly from the recovery device, right? Or an in-place recovery. And with an in-place recovery scenario, no data needs to be transferred across the network, and the VM and its data can be returned to operation in a matter of minutes, right? So we have a couple of features like this within our product as well. So for many organizations, this capability combined with hourly CBT backups can eliminate the need for separate business continuity software. So to take just a moment, when we look at continuity, business continuity software, there was a time when it was either daily backups or it was continuous protection, high availability. There was no middle ground within that. And what I see from a lot of customers is that maybe an hourly schedule is just fine for them during business hours, right? So they're not as concerned with that, and they're able to and their accepted recovery, is several hours. So to them it doesn't matter as much. So definitely something to think about as far as that as well. Now, of course, some vendors out there are also extending this capability to the cloud, right? So when the in-place part of the recovery actually occurs is in the remote data center, right? Whether it's an Arcserve cloud, Amazon and Azure cloud, a colo that you might have, right? In these architectures, data is typically backed up locally, then replicated to that, again, cloud location. And placed in a position for recovery in the event of a site disaster, right? So it kind of helps with that local protection and the availability issues, plus also provides DR readiness for that as well. I have a funny story where a customer actually was frustrated because his company was so focused on cloud, they didn't even know what cloud was, but the owner company was, every conversation was cloud, 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 cloud. He's like, cloud just doesn't make sense for us. And I said, well, you have multiple locations. Tell me you're building your own cloud, and it's in the other location, right? So, which was actually a good solution for them, right? So they have that offsite capability. They have, for them, is really just offsiting their data, which they call it Company A. So it was Company A cloud is what they labeled it, and perfect for what they were rolling out as far as that goes. And then definitely when you look at, trade-offs in between in-place recovery, change block restores, definitely there'll be some recovery time there with when the VM needs to be moved back to its primary storage destination as well. So it's unlikely the backup device has the performance and redundancy of the primary storage device. So definitely things to keep in mind as far as that as well, that we also keep in mind. And when we kind of look at, specifically Arcserve and how Arcserve kind of does backup for VMware and Hyper-V, not that we don't support other virtualization vendors, because we absolutely do that, right? We support, but from an agentless perspective, the two vendors that we support agentless are VMware and Hyper-V as far as that goes. We do a single pass backup of all VMs, right? So we enable that. No need to install software agents or VMware VIX, for example. You don't need to do that. We do support, backing up only the change blocks, right? And of course, we do integrate with the APIs from VMware and Microsoft as well. This will help with everything from, how it's discovered, events, vStorage, and all of that as well. And we're going to support the latest, from these vendors as well, as far as like vSphere 6, virtual volumes, and those kind of things as well. Cluster shared volumes, things like that as well from Microsoft. We do take application consistent snapshots, SQL, Active Directory, Exchange, purging those logs. That's always going to be important for you as well. And then, as far as, grouping your plans together, managing everything within one console, even without of that, right? So I could have, and we talked a little bit earlier about having, both VMware and Hyper-V in an environment. Well, what you can do in those cases is going to be you can create a plan that includes machines from both VMware and Hyper-V, and the fill is going to be very much the same. You can have rules within that plan that apply both to VMware and Hyper-V, so your actual plan is going to go through. Now I can also, within that same console, back up any physical machines I have, right? So maybe I only have one, domain, not one domain controller, but one physical domain controller and one virtual domain controller. Well, I still probably should back up that domain controller that's physical, so I could do, bare metal restore or something like that in case that machine goes down, so still being able to manage that within the console in that method as well. New instant VM recovery. This is a new feature for us, which, it's come up in almost every one of my conversations with customers when we talk about the features, and I show them the product as far as that goes, right? So when we look at, whoops, as we go off that screen, sorry about that. When we look at this feature, right, the key result here is I'm going to spin up a backup as if it was a virtual machine, right? It's going to be much faster than actually recovering the machine. Right, so I'm going to emulate to the host that my backup is a virtual machine. It supports both agent-based and agentless, right? So it could be a physical machine. I spin that backup in a virtual environment just like it was that, right? And I go to any of my backups that are backed up as long as I've captured the machine info, right? The system state, the OS, those kind of things. The key here is there's no pre-copy required. Right, so I don't have to have additional storage space in order to do this, right? So I'm emulating that backup to the host as if it were an actual backup, right? An actual virtual machine, I mean. So not having to have 3 copies of the data is key for some customers. And then being able to do this across platforms, right? Windows, Linux, virtual machines, and of course virtual to virtual, virtual to physical restores, all those capabilities are going to be in there. Physical machines I could spin up in this as well. So this is, instant virtual machine. When we look, we have another offering that's similar to this, which is Virtual Standby. You get better performance with that offering, but it actually does the conversion ahead of time, right? So you do have a third copy of the data, which is your standby machine ready to turn on. It really comes down to performance, right? If I need a DR, with automatic testing, and I want to have the best performance capabilities, I would probably go with Virtual Standby, right? And you kind of plan for that. Instant virtual machine recovery, I can, once I have that machine spun up, I could do things like vMotion and make it a virtual machine so I can improve the performance on it. And when I say the performance is not going to be as good, there's a lot of variables there, right? So there's networking variables in there, what kind of resources do you assign it, of course, as well, things like that too. So you do have a little bit more flexibility with instant virtual machine recovery. I might even use this as just a proof of life. Let me spin up a backup, let me log into it, let me make some changes, do things like that so I can make sure, okay, I can use that server and then discard it once I'm done, right? And I don't necessarily need to bring it on the network for that. I can just boot up the machine without a NIC, which is one of the options that you have with instant virtual machine recovery. I did talk and speak a little bit about virtual standby there before, but the difference here being that this is going to be, a third copy of your data, right? This is going to be the best performance that you can get out of the box. It has that automated testing, in there as well. So not testing, but automated, where's going back to the host, pinging the host, making sure the host is available, and then having automatic failover if you want it in there, right, or manual failover as far as that goes as well. Also, I see this a lot of times. A customer might have an environment on, for instance, on VMware, right, and maybe they have one of our appliances which have Hyper-V on it. Well, when we do this conversion, either with Instant Virtual Machine or we do it with Virtual Standby, again, we can go physical to virtual, VMware to Hyper-V, Hyper-V to VMware. It doesn't really matter as far as that goes, right? We're going to automatically register everything with a hypervisor. I mentioned, it's going to monitor the production server and have that automatic or manual failover as far as that goes. And of course it's going to come up with the same settings unless you go in and change those settings, right, as far as that goes. So it should have, automatic kind of end-user redirection. You shouldn't have to worry about that either as far as that goes. And again, when I'd use Virtual Standby, I'm concerned more about performance, right, some automated testing, those kind of things as well. So definitely things to look at there from features and where the two have different places. They're both available in the product. So you may have some key servers. You want to have some automatic kind of testing. Again, I keep saying testing, but automatic monitoring, right? So that you're monitoring that source machine, but then still have instant virtual machine available for all your other backups that you're doing as well. Also, where the product comes into play, right, is virtual system migration, right? So I want to migrate a system over to become a, most common is probably physical to virtual, right, doing a P2V migration. But then what I've seen a lot of times is somebody may have rolled out a virtual infrastructure. It may be Hyper-V, it may be VMware, and they want to migrate, right? They want to go from one to the other. It could be even something where I have, KVM, right, or I have Citrix Zen or something like that. Now I want to go over to, which in our case we treat those agent-based, right? So now I want to go over to Hyper-V or to VMware. So you could use this for that migration as well. A lot of reasons why people change, virtualization vendors. Sometimes it's because you get a new, system admin that's in place, a new somebody that comes in, maybe even higher up the chain, a CTO or something like that that's familiar with, one vendor or the other and says, hey, I like the way this performs better. I think it's better. I have my reasons, and it's time for renewal. So let's just, look at doing the switch over. I've seen that be one reason, right? And actually quite a bit of times when it's just familiarity with the hypervisor and all of that. Also, it's useful for moving applications, right, from physical to virtual. And as I said before, from virtual back over to physical if you decide you don't really like the way that it performs and all that as well. And creating, test and dev environments, all of that as well. When we look at, cloud-based backup providers, they offer a number of benefits, right? The best VMware cloud backups, eliminate the need to deal with tape backup, right? Or the cost and worry around shuffling data, off-site physically. That's probably one of the most common reasons why I see people wanting to take their data out to cloud, right? Data is currently kept online. It's accessible for browsing and on-demand restore. Online data enables features such as virtual labs and automatic backup testing, those kind of things, right? It also enables virtual labs, automatic backup testing, and primary backup is on-site, right? That's key here as well. Secondary is cloud and replicated off-site, right? So that's kind of thing to keep in mind. And it also offers that kind of subscription-based pricing as far as that goes, right, as well. When you look at best practices, right, best practices excuse me there, you know, don't back up virtual machines at the guest OS layer. Definitely not something that that I recommend. Whenever you can avoid that, you know, do an agentless backup. That way you'll have less impact on the hypervisor. It won't impact other machines that are running on that hypervisor as well. You'll see the least amount of impact as far as that goes. So definitely use and leverage the storage APIs whenever you can, right? You know, and you should also kind of know how, you know, VSS works and questing backups, things like that. You know, how it's going to work with transactional applications like databases, email servers. You know, it's kind of critical that you quest them so that they are in a proper state to be backed up. Right? You got to make sure they're in the right state at the right time. You not only grabbing, of course, those applications and that data, but the logs that are associated with it and all of that as well, to make sure you're getting that application consistent backup, right? And then, you know, don't skimp on backup resources. Right? You should never do that. There was a time when, okay, I have this out-of-date server, let me go ahead and use it for my backup server. But nowadays, a lot of the processing is being offloaded to the backup server. So, you know, I can't stress enough, you know, not to skimp here, you know, to make sure that you look at, you know, what you need to address from a perspective of your backup server to make sure it's spec'd out correctly. Make sure it has, you know, adequate network bandwidth, processing, memory, things like that, of course. And then don't treat snapshots as backups. Virtual machine snapshots should never be used as a primary backup means, right? They're okay for short term, yeah, and ad hoc kind of backups of VMs, but there are penalties that are incurred when you're using them, right? So snapshots protect against logical user errors. They do not protect against full data loss, you know, hardware failure, floods, things like that, etc. So definitely should not do that. And what we're going to do now is I'm going to go ahead and I do see a number of questions in there. What I'm going to do first is switch over to my server and we'll take a look at you know, Arcserve UDP and kind of from there just show you some things of how we utilize and work with virtualized environments within Arcserve UDP. So this is UDP 6. It's a web-based tool, right? So I log in, IE, Chrome, Firefox, one of those tools, right? And when you first log in, you're going to be presented with, you know, your week's worth of backups, right? So you can kind of see how that goes. You know, do you have any failures? I usually have one that I create just manually so that we can go in and look at. But all of these are interactive. You know, how's my storage? You know, if I have an appliance, you know, there's I can set thresholds on those as well. So, you know, am I getting close to the maximum level of storage as well? So we can kind of address all those things. When I look at, you know, interacting and where I'm going to actually do 90% of everything that I do within our product, it's within this resource tab here up top. That's where I can go through and I can import machines. I can go through and I can create backups. I can manage my destinations that I'm backing up to, whether or not I want to implement deduplication, whether or not I want to implement encryption, compression, any of those things. I can do all that within the storage and our destinations. Also managing things like cloud accounts, shared folders, all different kinds of things like that. Different infrastructures, right? If I have storage arrays to take advantage of the hardware-based snapshots, we support NetApp today for that, and we will be adding to that list. I've seen, a few vendors, that we're definitely have on our roadmap, but that's for another discussion. But definitely, we will be expanding it from that. This environment has quite a bit going on, right? I have VMware, I have Hyper-V, I have Windows, I have Linux, I have Virtual Standby going on, I have all of that. The one thing about our tools, it kind of expands with your environment. So as you discover systems, right, through Hyper-V, we create a Hyper-V group. Same thing for vCenter, same thing for Linux. As we discover these different systems, we add these groups. So if you only have Hyper-V, you're not going to see these additional groups, right? If you don't have any Linux, you're not going to see those. So it's going to be very streamlined to actually what you have in your environment as far as all of that. Adding machines, we have a number of ways to do this. I have a wizard that would take us through actually creating a plan, choosing where we want to back up to, and adding our machine through there. Very straightforward kind of configuration wizard. If I just want to add nodes and bring them in through, a virtualization perspective, right? I want to bring them in through Hyper-V or vCenter. I can easily just go in and import those machines, right? So I can list my, in this case, my vSphere server, connect to it, and then it will go through, it'll pull that information. Of course, the more servers that you have in your environment, the longer this is going to take. It's going to discover all of that. And if you have, in this case, I'm importing from vCenter, right? So if I have multiple hosts, it's going to grab from all of that. Now, it's not going to import it, of course. I only have one host, but if I had multiple hosts, I'd expand all those hosts, grab the machines that I want to import in. I'm not bringing them into a backup plan at this point. I'm just importing them into my environment. So when I go to create backup plans, then I can kind of work within that. And I could even do this step as I create a backup plan. So it's fairly straightforward, creating backup plans and doing those kind of things and importing things into the console. Very straightforward. I can create my own custom groups. So if I have dev servers and I want to have a group for development servers, I could do that and throw all the servers into that group. So then I could create, make it easier to create plans and manage those different systems. Maybe I create a group like that, and then I just right-click on the group, and I can go ahead and say, backup now, right, once I go into it. So then it would back up all those machines, as long as there's a plan associated with those machines. When we look at, creating plans, I already have some created here, so I'm not going to, again, I want to do this kind of high level and quick. I don't want to go into take too much of your time today, but just kind of show you from the simplicity. If we go into the plan and we don't use the wizard, what we would do is, again, we're going to define a proxy. This proxy is going to be the machine that VMware Hyper-V provides that snapshot out to. If I'm backing up a physical machine, the only real difference is I don't define a proxy, right? There's an agent on that machine, so I don't have to worry about it, right? So if I add nodes, again, I can select nodes from within UDP. I could import from, Hyper-V or VMware if I haven't already imported those machines, and I would just move the machines over that I want to have in that plan and go ahead and accept it. And then I'm going to have some rules that are specific to VMware, specific to Hyper-V, on how we're requesting those snapshots, right? Are we using VSS or VMware tools in the case of VMware? How's that data being transported? Are we letting VMware kind of manage that, or are we setting a priority for that? And then same kind of thing for Hyper-V, right? A couple of my favorites here. VM must be backed up using snapshots generated by Microsoft VS. So whenever I want to have an automatic failure to show somebody, I pick one of my Linux machines and turn this on, right? So of course we can't do VSS on Linux. So that causes my failure, and I can go in and show like how we can look at logs and different things like that, and get a little bit better than just seeing successes, right? Because we want to see some failures in those cases. But in some cases you may want to force VSS within the machine, right? Or if you want the VM to be placed into a save state, there's certain times that that's the preferred method for that application to be supported as well. And then whether or not we want to have snapshot separation. I've seen this in very large Hyper-V environments where there's a lot of VMs on a host. If we don't turn this on, right, we wait for Hyper-V to snapshot all the machines and provide them over to us. So this prevents some issues that could come up with that, right, because it'll do them kind of one at a time or individually. But we are backing up the entire systems here. You'll see that there's no options here for volumes or anything like that. We're grabbing those individual systems and backing up the systems. Now with things like deduplication, we're not actually writing a lot of data to disk and those kind of things. So just keep that in mind too, right? So I may back up 10 systems. They're all Windows 2012, maybe a 2008 R2 server in there or something like that as well. So we're not writing, 10 copies of the same OS on disk. We're going to deduplicate that data and write a lot less to disk as far as that goes. So your restore options improve because you've backed up the entire machine. You can restore the VM, restore the files, folders, whatever you want to do out of there. If you wanted to send it over to a physical machine, do V2P conversion, you could do a bare metal restore. You get a lot more capabilities because we are backing up the entire system. Right? Of course, we're going to choose our destination, right, which would be a recovery point server. That's where we're going to do our deduplication, replication, things like that. Or you could go to a share. If you wanted to go to a network share like a NAS box or something like that, you could do that as well. I always recommend having a dedicated recovery point server because then you get that additional capability like deduplication and things like that as well. And then with the tool, you're going to be able to schedule very granularly your backups, your daily backups, weekly, monthly, if you want to do backups throughout the day, right? You can definitely schedule that and have different schedules, different retention policies, and one of the nice things about virtualization is we can actually mount the backups once they're done, and we can mount what we call the recovery point, which would be the essence of a full backup, even though we've just done an incremental, right? It's that full and everything below it that we mount, and we can run check disk against it to make sure that there's no issues. So it's another layer of verification. And I keep kind of speaking to incrementals, but of course we give you the ability to schedule fulls, verification jobs, right? You should always verify your backups. So all those are options to schedule as well. So again, we have advanced notifications, things like that to look at. I don't want to spend, too much time on how to schedule a backup, but just to show you it's fairly straightforward, right, as far as that goes. From a restore perspective, which I always think is the most important thing, right? So if I go to a machine, that I've done a backup on, let me choose this particular one down here that's on Hyper-V, right? I can go right into here and I can choose what I want to do. I could go ahead and create an instant VM. This is one of my favorite things to do, right? So whether this was a physical machine or a virtual machine, right, we could just go through here and expand out, where do I want to restore from, what point in time that I did my backup. In this case, it's encrypted, so we'll go ahead and put in our key, and in 4 steps I'm going to be done, right? So that's the key here, right? So I'm going to restore this using vSphere. I'm going to choose my host. I only have one, but if you had multiples, right, you choose the host that you want to present it out to, and it'll load up here. There's my host. And what do we want the server what server do we want to present out to that host, right, to do the emulation, right? It could be our dedicated recovery point server, our appliance, right, if you want it to do that, or it could be another server, right? So in our case, I'm going to choose another server, right? Reason why you might do an additional server is a couple of reasons. Number one, NFS has to be enabled, so for some reason you didn't have NFS enabled on your backup server, although you could enable it, right? Easy enough. Or maybe your backup server's got a lot of load because it's doing a lot of backups, things like that, right? So we'll just give it a name for a description. I'm going to cache and capture any changes that happen when that machine's up and running. So I'm just going to point to a folder that I created. I've already got that one created. The resources you want to give that machine. And then if I want to connect an adapter right? What do I want to do? It's going to pull all the adapter settings from the original machine, but you could change those, of course, as well. And then once we're done with that, we just go ahead and boot the machine now. And if I hop over to my VMware environment, my vCenter, we'll see this machine. It's already been created, and we'll kind of go on from there. So it'll create the machine, and we can start using it in a couple minutes. In mine, I don't have a lot of resources. It takes like 2 or 3 minutes, but that's how easy it is to kind of start doing it and start going from there. Also, when we take a look at that, other restore options, again, I'm going to go into the same machine I used for the other one. We can go through and we can do restores, right? So I can connect into that machine. I can get those restore options again, which are granularly browse, the files, the folders, do all of that kind of restore options. I can recover a VM right back into a virtual environment. So since this is a virtual machine, I can just go through, choose my backup date, choose my virtual environment I want to put it back into, either the original or an alternate location, and I'm good to go. Right, so I can go through that. So a couple of quick, easy ways to do restores. Of course, if there was Active Directory, Exchange, SQL on those machines, we'd be able to go in and restore that data as well. So what I'm going to do now, again, I don't want to take up too much this time. I want to make sure that we have time to answer questions. So what I'm going to do is go ahead and minimize this, and we'll go over to our questions. And let me put that back on the screen. So let's go ahead and just, Mary, let's look at some of the questions that are out there. I do see a few, so we'll kind of just start from the top here. I have a question from Dean Nielsen. Can you back up mobile devices, lots of mobile devices? Right now, Arcserve does not have a solution for, iOS, like iPhones or tablets or that, or even Android, right? So we don't have a solution today for that. Now, that's not to say, as I had mentioned, that there's been a lot of change within Arcserve over the last year and a half. As far as, since we've become an independent company, and we're definitely looking at different ways we can expand our portfolio. And I know mobile devices have been something that we've looked at. I don't know that for sure it's on the roadmap, but it is something that there is interest in, on whether or not, we can make that happen. As I said, we got into the cloud, kind of appliances, things that we weren't in, 18 months ago or whatever. So definitely we're rapidly expanding and evolving, but doing this also, at a sense of, kind of, making sure it's done right. Right. So as far as that goes, I don't think we've had, complaints with either of those things that we've rolled out, the appliances or the cloud or any of those. So we're making sure we also do it correctly, and we don't just jump into something and then all of a sudden have a mess on our hands. So I hope to see, some capability as far as that expanding out there as well. And you talk about backing up over Wi-Fi there, Dean, as well. And I've also seen maybe some types of things where, sometimes it's not even just Wi-Fi, it's cellular, right, and different things like that 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 you have to take advantage of. And we do have, if you look at from a client perspective, I know we have a couple, clients that actually do some replication over cellular, and they do this, and now it happens to be a server that has a cellular connection out to another location, but they do this via scheduled replication, and then they back up where they're replicating to. So we do have some methods to handle kind of cellular connectivity as far as that goes, but we don't typically do a backup over cellular. We do more of a replication approach, and then back up that destination that we're going to. Be happy to talk to you further about it, but again, that doesn't address the mobile devices that we are talking about. So, a question about EqualLogic on the list of supported SAN vendors for direct integration and snapshots. Today, talking about hardware snapshots, today only NetApp. I can't really speak to, the list yet that that we're looking at expanding it to, but there's several vendors out there, at least 4 probably that we're looking at. So definitely just to let you know there, Everett, that we're definitely looking at expanding that. Today it's NetApp. We had to start with 1, and once that coding and all is done for the 1, it gets much easier now to add additional vendors. So we do hope to add quite a bit as far as that goes. Question here from Isaiah Benitez. I hope I said your name right. When doing an agentless install, does it require a restart of the guest VM? Does an agent-based install for a physical require a reboot? So in an agentless install, there is no agent that gets installed. So no, there's not any kind of reboot required. Now, I'm going to answer your question for the physical machine. Does it require a reboot? One of the biggest enhancements to the latest version of the product is our agents no longer require reboots, right? So that's definitely a positive. Now, I've seen use cases or there's been exceptions, right? But these are far and few between. Usually, no, we do not require a reboot when we deploy out our agent. That's an improvement within our product. When we went from version 5 to version 6 is we changed our driver where it interacts, right? So that you don't have to worry about that anymore. It's one of the kind of, afterthought kind of mentions when we talk about version 6, because we talk about cool things like instant virtual machine, but really when I talk to users of version 5, one of the most excited things they were looking at were the fact that they didn't have to reboot systems anymore. So it's definitely one of the most important ones out there. Can the web-based UI be used to manage multiple backup servers at different customer sites? Well, I mean, it's a web address that you hit, so you could access different customers' sites in that method. We also have, a feature called the gateway feature that helps somewhat with that. It's not a multi-tenant solution today. Hopefully, we'll see it eventually go that way. But I do have, a couple of different users out there that will either just access different customers' consoles, right, and manage it differently in that method, or, I do have some customers that will even use kind of the gateway feature. It just kind of depends on the industry and the company, to be honest with you. Okay. Another question there from Isaiah. It is supported to be able to back up a physical machine at a customer site without having a backup server. You definitely could do an agent-based backup. So you could back up to a NAS or a share, something like that. You don't have to have a recovery point server. So if it's a small environment, single server or something like that, and they just want to back up to to a local kind of share or something like that, you could do that as well. So we do, and we do have a number of customers that do that. You lose some capabilities like deduplication, replication, some things like that. But in my experience, in those small environments, a lot of times those are not key requirements from the customer. So our product's nice because you can still use that console, right? So you can still have that console if you want to have it and still manage that. So you can still get that kind of management perspective, and then you can still do the backup to a share or something like that as well. So great question there. So from Baron, here's a good question from Baron Allen. It talks about he's on version 5. He doesn't have instant VM. So in version 5, it was Virtual Standby, right? That was in that version, as it is in version 6 as well. And when you restore with instant VM, can you also restore at the cloud location? So as long as that backup has moved to cloud, right? So when I'm in that cloud location, yes, definitely you'd have to get the hypervisor information so you're connecting to the host. But whether you're doing that on-site or off-site, as long as you have that information to be able to do that. Now, you wouldn't want, I don't think you'd want to restore a local backup up to the cloud using Instant VM because you have your WAN in between, and that's going to greatly probably impact your performance of that. But if you replicated your data up to the cloud, why not do an instant VM up in the cloud? So definitely is a capability to look at as far as that's going. Is replicating to private cloud supported as well? A question from Isaiah here. To private cloud, when we look at replicating to private cloud, we support first off public cloud, right? So Amazon, AWS, and replicating the data up there, right? So we definitely support that. Public cloud, we support Eucalyptus, right? So they're a public cloud vendor or a private cloud vendor, so we do support them. And if you just have somewhere where you can put a recovery point server that we replicate to, we could work with that as well. We may not treat it as it's a cloud. It may just be another recovery point server in your console, but there's some ways creatively where we could work with that. So if Isaiah, if you want to do some follow-up with me on that, we can kind of talk about what that would look like and all that as well. Can you do an agentless backup? This question is from Lynn DeGuire. Can you do a agentless backup and granular restore in Exchange 2010 and Microsoft SQL? Yes to both of those, right? So you're still going to have the capability to do granular restore for Exchange down to the task, to the to the email, the calendar event. You'll have all of those, and from a SQL perspective, you'll have database level restore with that. And what I've seen customers do at that, if they do need to get to an individual table or something like that, they may restore the database and then grab the data out of the database, so restore it to an alternate location, something like that as well. On Exchange, you can restore it back into the Exchange database. You could restore it into a different Exchange server if you want to, into a PST file. You get a lot of capabilities as far as that goes from a granularity perspective with that. Does the cloud UDP need the hypervisor installed? From Baron Allen. You would only need a hypervisor installed if you wanted to do a DR scenario where you needed to fail over. And the way it works with the Arcserve cloud is you would contact us and we would spin up a hypervisor and give you the information to that, and then you could start that failover in that process. That's the way that it would work. For a perspective of just backing up and replicating your data over, we don't necessarily need that, whether it's our cloud or somebody else's cloud. But if you want to do a DR where you're spinning that up virtually, then you do need to have access to a hypervisor. So that kind of, do you have access to hypervisor in Azure? I don't think that you do, right? And same thing with AWS. They don't really give you. Now, AWS may support nesting. I know Azure does not, but things to consider, right, as far as that goes. Keep that in mind. Now, and you did clarify for instant VM there, Baron. I hadn't gotten down to that line, but if you want to do instant VM, definitely, you have to have access to a hypervisor to point to, say, this is my hypervisor that I want to spin this up and emulate to. What version of Arcserve is the create a VM option on? If you mean the instant VM there, Michael, version 6 offered that version, right? Version 5 of UDP introduced Virtual Standby, right? Or even really D2D had a Virtual Standby capability if we go back even further, but it was a separate product, right? But in UDP, version 6 offers instant VM, and that the Virtual Standby feature is available also in version 5. Now, you may also mean not only the version but the edition, right? So within the product there's different editions. There's standard, advanced, there is premium, and then there's premium plus. So standard and advanced offer virtual standby, and advanced offers instant virtual machine. So definitely, probably, if you want instant virtual machine, you're looking at least an advanced license as far as that goes. So keep that in mind. Yep, and I see, I'm just going through the questions here. I'm not skipping any. I see some are in twice, so I'm not reading those. Hopefully I've already answered those adequately. Right, so a good question here from Isaiah about we've done an instant virtual machine. We have a machine up and running. Now I want to restore back to the original host, right? So is there a method in order to do that, right? To do that so that we don't have any downtime. And one method is I could just kind of do a, if it's at the same location, right? I could do, for instance, on VMware, I could do vMotion, right? And I could convert that over to a permanent machine, right, on the original host that I want to spin it up on. That would be one method to do it. If it's like instant VM at another location, you would back it up, you would replicate it back over to the original site, and then you would restore it there. So there may be a little bit of downtime there. You'd have to kind of plan for that. Maybe instead of replicating the entire thing, you just send over the changes, and you grab that as well. So some different things. It kind of depends where the DR machine is and where you want to restore it back to. But if it's in the same environment, you could just use the tools within your hypervisor in order to do that. Now on Linux, it's a little bit different because on Linux, we can actually, there is a tool within Linux Restore to just go ahead and make that a permanent VM. But on Windows, we have to use the tools that are within VMware and Hyper-V to do that conversion. So a question here from Jim Charles about backing up the actual ESX host with Windows servers to the cloud, then in the Arcserve to restore the host. So typically what I think you're asking here, Jim, is backing up the host and all the VMDKs and the backing up in that method, right, and then bringing it up somewhere else. We're going to act at a different level. Right? It is, I see customers less interested in protecting the host itself. There'll be a configuration file that you want to protect, right? You always want to back up that configuration file, but we're going to be accessing the machines differently. Right now, what we can do is back up those machines, replicate them out to the cloud, bring up a host, and then attach those machines to that host, right, and do it in that method. So there are ways to kind of do that. And then when we do that, we kind of forget whether they're ESX or Hyper-V. It doesn't really matter. It depends on the environment that you're spinning them up in, whether or not we'd connect them to VMware or Hyper-V and so forth. Okay, so a question from Bill James about migrating virtual to virtual, right? VMware to Hyper-V. Can you back up from VMware and then scratch the host, install Hyper-V, and then restore to the new Hyper-V? Yeah, no reason why you couldn't do that, right? So I could, I could definitely do that. Right, so when we back up and we do the recover VM, we have to go Hyper-V to Hyper-V, VMware to VMware. But when we do something like instant virtual machine or virtual standby, that's going to be different, right? Then we can change the host that we're on. We can change the hypervisor that we're on, Hyper-V or VMware. And even in some cases, we could even do a bare metal restore if we want to do it that way, but that's probably the most time-consuming of all the methods in order to do that. So I would create a virtual machine, a blank one, and then treat it like it were physical. But in my recommendation, do instant virtual machine, right? Spin that up and then make it permanent with vMotion, or like I said, I know Hyper-V has something similar to vMotion. I always forget the name of it though, but use the tool that's within there. All right, great question here from Luis Sosa about UDP and whether or not it's part of Arcserve backup, right? And what's the file format of the backup, right? Is there a way to do a copy instead of a backup to keep the VMDK and VMX format, right? So UDP is a different product than Arcserve backup. In some ways, it'll leverage Arcserve backup. So if I wanted to go to tape, I would leverage, the tape functionality in Arcserve backup to within UDP, right? So I could go to off to tape. So it does leverage it. We do give you a license for both and different access, depending on the license that you purchase when you do UDP. Arcserve backup is a file-based backup, right? So when you look at that, you're directly accessing individual files, looking to see if they change, those kind of things, and backing them up. UDP instead is an image-based backup that's going to be backing up volumes, taking advantage of things like change block tracking. It's going to be much faster. You can back up, throughout the day if you want to, because you're going to be imaging as opposed to that. It's going to be at the image level. It's going to be at the machine level, the volume level. It's not going to be necessarily accessing where the VMDKs are, or the VHDs in the case of Microsoft. Now you could, in theory, you could install in Microsoft down on the host, right, and then you could access the VHDs, but you lose granularity when you do that, and I never recommend you do that. Instead, do an agentless backup inside that machine. You'll get the option to recover the entire machine if you want to do that. You'll get the option to also to recover individual files of folders, and data out applications, things like that. So definitely those are the things to look at. Now something like, as far as the file format goes, yeah, it's got a different file format. It's a ton of different files. I couldn't even tell you, what it all look like. Whereas when you look at Arcserve backup, what goes on tape is I think a CTF file, simple, tape format, something like that. But and that hasn't changed, right, over because I want to say it seems like forever, right? UDP hasn't really changed either. We're still going to have Arcserve backup. That product, we don't have any plans on that going away. We still have a big user base for Arcserve backup as far as that goes. We are gradually moving some of that capability into UDP, so where we go in the future, whether or not you'll do your tape backup, file-based backup through the UDP console. It's a possibility, but today we still have both products. I still have cases where it's still a good reason for customers to go with, Arcserve backup. All they need to do is back up a couple of files, something like that. So in some cases, it still is the route for some customers, but UDP clearly is kind of the progression and the future, I think, of the way that we're doing backups. 90% of all my calls that I do are customers looking for ways to back up directly to disk, and they're also looking for ways to back up, and take advantage of snapshot technology instead of doing file-based backups. And Mary, that's really all the questions that I see out there. So if you want, unless you had any other questions, that you got.
No, I think you did a great job getting through all of those. I want to thank everybody for hanging on here a couple extra minutes. I know we had tons of questions, and thank you everyone that attended for all of your participation. The Q&A is what makes these interesting. And thank you so much, Stacy, for that great presentation and demo. I'll be sending out a recording of this session in a couple of hours, so you can keep an eye out for that. It'll go to the email that you registered with. And if you have any additional questions for us, you can reach us at arcserve.com, or the fastest way is to reach out to us by the phone. Our number is on here on the screen. It's also at arcserve.com, so please do reach out to us if there's anything we can do to help you. And everybody have a great rest of your day.